chapter 13. Samson is the last judge to be recorded in this book. Samson is also mentioned in Hebrews 11:32 as one of the Old Testament greats. And even though he's not the captain of an army or the prominent king or ruler, Samson was a believer in Yahweh. And as we'll see at the end of Samson's story, he brought a type of salvation or deliverance with his own hands for his people, pointing us to the figure of Christ, the Messiah that was to come. So let's start reading verse 1. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. This is another similar story of how Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord after the previous judge died. And this lets us know that Israel again is in need of a leader, a deliverer. God had delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years because of their sin. But just a reminder that where sin is great, grace is greater. That's Romans 5:20. This doesn't give us license to sin, but the comfort in knowing that when we do sin, we have a deliverer who is ready to take us back in. Verse 2, there was a certain man of Zorah of the tribe of the Danites whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. This is the first mention of Samson's parents. Manoah was from the tribe of Dan, and his wife had been barren. Samson's parents had waited a long time for a child. Isaiah 54:1 says that the barren will soon sing for joy because the children of the desolate will be more than the children of her who is married. For us today, the waiting can often feel torturous and never ending. But through the waiting, if we keep pressing into God's presence, we see that he's on the journey with us. And whether we receive what we've been waiting for or we end up on a different path completely, the hope that we have held on to for so long during the waiting becomes an encouragement for others to draw from when they find themselves on their own journey of waiting. Verse 3. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. The angel of the Lord, this is Christ himself. And notice that it's a woman who is entrusted with this information before her husband gets the message. God values women. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't know the God of the Bible. And this angel of the Lord, he first acknowledges her struggle, that she is not born any children. And then he gives her comfort in his promise to her. And the promise is, you shall conceive and bear a son. Verse 4 and 5, therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. He now gives the command on how she should carry herself before the child is born. No wine, no strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. And the same shall be for the child, with the added part that no razor shall touch his head, as he will be under a Nazarite vow. This Nazarite vow meant that he was, in the strictest sense, set apart, completely devoted to God. A person under the Nazarite vow meant that you separated yourself. And Numbers 6 talks about this vow. And also, as a side note, when Paul cuts his hair in Acts 18, it's related to this vow. The end of verse 5 says, this child shall begin to save Israel. Notice the word begin. This implies that the Philistines were going to oppress the Israelites for a long time. And even Samson wouldn't complete their deliverance. He would only begin it. Fast forward to David, who was said to complete the destruction of the Philistines. Both Samson and David are Christ types. One would start the deliverance, one would complete it, both pointing to Jesus, who is both the author and perfecter or finisher of our faith. He starts the deliverance, he completes the deliverance. And that's found in Hebrews 12 too. Verse 6, then the woman came and told her husband, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God. Very awesome. I didn't ask him where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name, but he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. So then drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. This woman is so awestruck by this messenger and his message, she can't even think to form a question or respond in any way. She's probably excited, scared, confused, overwhelmed, all these natural emotions that one might have. And it's possible that she also thought this messenger was a prophet. So when she goes to her husband, she doesn't have much extra info about who he was or where he was from. She just knew something was extraordinary about this meeting that she just experienced. Verse 8, then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do with the child who will be born. Manoah hears what his wife is saying, and instead of blowing her off, he gives credit to her story. And we see this by the way he prays. He totally believes what his wife has told him, and he wants to be a part of it. And this shows us the respectability and virtue of the wife, the mother of the next great leader. God has a plan with who he chooses to use. One last thing to point out in this verse is that Manoah wants to hear from this messenger for himself. He doesn't send someone else to inquire about who this person was. He wants it for himself. And for us today, we would also be wise to ask God to speak directly to us rather than depend on others to tell us what's going on. And this means we have to be in the Word for ourselves. Pastors and teachers, they can help give us insight and direction, but then it's our responsibility to seek after God on our own, to hear from God with our own ears, directly from God. Verse 9, and God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. This is most likely the same day. And God is faithful to respond to those who truly desire to know him. God sends this messenger, Christ, again to the woman who is back in the field alone. And this is how I see it. The angel of the Lord appears to the woman and gives her the message. She runs to tell her husband, who then prays to God to send the messenger again. And after he prays, he probably tells his wife, go back to work and let me know if anything happens. And then he goes back to work too. There's work to be done. Verse 10, so the woman ran quickly and told her husband, behold, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me. She runs back to Manoah, and this is most likely the same day, even though it says the other day. And I love that she's alone again. And if I've learned anything about God, is that he loves to be with us when we are alone, when there are no distractions, no noise, nothing to get in the way. This is when he shows up for the woman twice. And this is when he shows up for us. And that's why it's so important to find time to be alone with God, to get away, to read his word, to study, to pray, to meditate, to just be quiet, to just be in his presence. Now let's draw our attention to the fact that she doesn't ask this person to come with her. So she's out in the field, he comes to her again, and she just takes off running to go get her husband. I find this really interesting. She leaves him there and runs back. She assumed that he was important enough that she shouldn't inconvenience him to have him go with her to meet with her husband. She was most likely out in the field, not a short distance away. This isn't like she's out in the garden and her husband's in the kitchen and someone shows up and she just walks 100 feet into her living room and her kitchen area. No, she is far out in the field and she's hustling to get back. One commentary I read said this: she didn't desire him to go with her to her husband, but would fetch her husband to him. Those that would meet with God must attend where he is pleased to manifest himself. When God shows up for us, we don't ask him to do it differently. We don't expect him to change the way he manifests his presence for our convenience. Where God decides to show up, we would be wise to run as fast and as hard as we can to be with him, because he